And following on from our reflections sessions earlier this morning, this session is a reflections and reporting back employer forum and Pacific. Our insights from that session will be shared by Dr. Alisi, Holani and Erin Simpson. Can I welcome Dr. Alisi to the stage, please? If you can all put your hands together. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I almost forgot that it's afternoon. Thank you very much for the opportunity to report back on the Pacific Islands and Timor-Leste Forum. I stand here to represent all of the 10 labor-sending countries, and I hope I do justice. We had a very robust discussion over 2 hours, and now I have to condense it into 5 minutes. So just a very quick presentation of the outcomes. So our discussions looked at some of the key employer LSU relations issues that we consider to be of common priority across the labor-sending countries. We identified these 6 issues as priority. One is worker welfare and support, as you would know. Looking at language barriers, this is still very much an issue with a lot of the workers. Accommodation and living conditions. There's obviously issues relating to overcrowding. There's reported issues relating to the cost, including the location, including of accommodation in areas which are prone to natural disasters. The issue of employment conditions, particularly in terms of workers not having enough hours of work. Reintegration is now a growing priority for the Pacific, and so there is a need for collaboration across stakeholders to look at how we can best support, including for skills training. And then looking at joint ATRs, countries have voiced the need to look at joint ATRs not to be split across countries, but to be specific to individual countries. And then to look at worker disengagement. I think that might be an issue that's not shared by all countries, but this is an issue that is considered as a priority. We didn't just discuss the issues, we really wanted a constructive discussion that would propose pragmatic solutions. And so we have here some of the proposed solutions or recommended solutions from the forum. Obviously, there is a need for increased collaboration. This was heard constantly from the forum, the need for improved coordination and collaboration amongst the labor sending units, as well as with industry stakeholders and government here in New Zealand. This would include the need to review the interagency understanding to reflect the ever-changing landscape, particularly the context and policies in labor-sending countries. There is a need to look at, we heard this morning about the industry growth here in New Zealand. Countries want to understand what is the contribution of workers to the local economy here in New Zealand. So they have proposed an independent research to do an impact assessment to look at the contribution of workers to the New Zealand economy, including industry, communities, and government. Pastoral care, as I mentioned, in terms of priority issues, what has been proposed as recommended solutions was there is a need to clarify roles. Obviously, in policy, employers are required to have a designated pastoral care employee, but the pastoral care role is also shared by team leaders as well as country liaison officers, but this role is not clearly articulated, especially in terms of references, and so there was a need from the countries to clarify this. Mental health, this is something that the countries have raised that should be prioritized in terms of the support that's given to workers so that a supporting environment and measures are provided. There was an increased need for grievance mechanisms to look at how best to address disputes. Termination procedures. There was a need to look at how you can best engage liaison officers and LSUs when it comes to termination of workers to make sure that due processes and due diligence is overseen, is considered. Absconding and disengagement, again, this is an issue that has been raised by countries, again, how to engage stakeholders, including liaising with local authorities to address these issues, and to perhaps give them an opportunity to return home and not to remain in New Zealand. There was also the consideration of lost souls. This is a term that was raised by the countries with reference to workers who have lost their employment contracts for different reasons and therefore have no legal right to stay in New Zealand. But because they do not have access to appropriate policy and support, they are usually left worse off. Accommodation, like I mentioned before, was another issue that was raised, noting that the cost of accommodation is increasing. So we recognize that there is work in progress through the Accommodation Review Committee and the need to look at a review of accommodation costs, the need to ensure that accommodation that is provided for RSE workers meets New Zealand standards, and that is to ensure also, in addressing that, to ensure that third-party accommodation providers are covered and monitored within policy. There was also the need to look at the location of accommodation, duly noting that availability, particularly in more rural areas, might be an issue, but to consider areas that are not prone to natural disasters, and also cultural issues where accommodation arrangements for males and females, as well as for married couples, to be considered. There was also the need to look at perhaps a grievance mechanism where LSUs could potentially also contribute, especially when it comes to the accreditation of employers. If there can be a mechanism for LSUs to register issues when it comes to non-compliant employers. The other issue or recommended solution was to look at superannuation. Obviously, workers, when they return home, they would like to have retirement funds under the RSE. This is not, superannuation is not provided, but voluntary contributions are being provided, and that process is being facilitated by employers, and we're very appreciative for that. The countries would like to see if this process could be perhaps streamlined, and if employers would consider perhaps a supplementary support for these voluntary contributions. And then lastly, with reintegration, I think this is still a very new concept, but the countries are now developing national reintegration initiatives and strategies, and so it would be good for employers to also be part of that dialogue, to look at not just employers, but also RSE stakeholders, to see how best we can collaborate to ensure that workers, that these initiatives are successful and that contribute to the economic development, economic and social benefits of labor mobility and RSE in the countries. But overall, from the discussions, when looking into the future of the RSE, the labor standing units are really looking and a bit concerned about the sustainability of the RSE going forward. We recognize that the numbers are declining. There's a declining trend in terms of number of workers, and we understand that this would be both in terms of demand and supply factors needs to be considered. But there's also a need to look at how we can reposition ourselves. We understand that technology might also play a role in terms of taking over some of these jobs and how it would impact demand going forward. New industries might be of priority. The countries want to, the Pacific and Timor-Leste countries want to understand how best they can reposition themselves to ensure that labor mobility and RSE still remains beneficial for them. And then also there was concern about 2 new visa categories being introduced here in New Zealand. How would this impact the demand for Pacific workers? I think overall, what is clear is there is a need for effective dialogue and for the Pacific's voice to be included in policy decision-making. And so we propose that this Pacific and Timor-Leste Forum to be continued going forward, and then for the Pacific to also be represented when it comes to policy discussions. Thank you very much.